I think there are so many things that you can control. Whether you choose to like kind of look inward and see that or not is kind of up to the person. But um, ultimately, there's so many things in life in general that you don't expect and maybe don't necessarily go your way, but kind of how you respond and your attitude is something that I've always tried to think about with um, soccer and just in life in general.
Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Oh My Curry Goodness. I'm your host Hamza Islam. On each episode of this podcast, I talk to Gen Zers from different fields about their story and the experiences that have shaped them into who they are today. I created this podcast because I don't want to just focus on the destination, but the journey that has led up to a specific destination. And why I focus on that is because I want to know what it's like to be another human being, putting myself in their shoes, focusing more on the good and bad experiences that have shaped a person into who they are today. Because storytelling is one of the few things that make human beings human beings. And so I hope you guys join me. I hope you guys, as listeners, join me in taking lessons from each guest that you think might help you in your personal life, as well as continuing to emphasize the importance of understanding because human beings have good and bad experiences, but that's what makes them who they are as they continue to pursue whatever it is that they want to whatever it is that they want to pursue. So I hope you guys continue to check back each and every week to learn from inspiring Gen Zers. Now this week I am speaking with Kennedy Wesley, who is a professional soccer player for the San Diego Wave of the National Women's Soccer League. She was recently drafted 12th overall at this year's NWSL draft and is the current record holder for most appearances for Stanford women's soccer team with 104 matches played. And for context, Stanford women's soccer is one of, if not the best, well, I'll say one of the best college programs for women's soccer. So I'm very excited to speak to Kennedy, also because I'm a big soccer fan. So it's always great to talk with someone who is currently a professional soccer player. So Kennedy Wesley, thank you so much for joining Oh My Curry Goodness.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited.
Of course. And I got to say, one of the things that really stuck out to me, and obviously we talked about this before recording, is that you are also a psychology and sociology major. And it's funny because I'm a computer science major, but if I had to choose, I would do psychology. The only reason why I didn't do it was that because I have a huge fear of spiders, and I thought psychologists had to overcome their fears. So I don't know if that's true, but that was what led me to not do psychology.
Honestly, if that were the case, I think I would choose another route as well because I have several fears of my own. Spiders could be one of them, and that would not go over too well. So luckily, I didn't have to do too much of that.
Oh my gosh. Well, at least, well, I'm glad that we have something in common, but who knows? Maybe I'll revisit it at some point. So, I know you are obviously a professional soccer player, firstly, and I know I'm really late in this, but congratulations for being drafted. But
Thank you.
I want to talk about experiences that shape a person, and I want to tie into the fact that I know you are a soccer player, but you used to be a violinist and a former gymnast. And one of the questions I like asking people is like, even if from the outside they're different, like violin, gymnastics, and soccer, you can always find like I guess like a Venn diagram where like you somehow find the commonality between or among the three things. So when you look at what you've learned as a violinist and a former gymnast, what are some of the things you've learned that you feel like have shaped you as you now pursue this journey of being a professional soccer player?
Yeah, that's a super interesting question. I think so. Comparing sort of the violin aspect, I did that when I was in middle school and a tiny bit in high school. I cannot say it was my best activity that I started, but as a violinist, being in an orchestra full of a bunch of people, it was almost easier to kind of blend in. And if you made a few mistakes here and there, maybe no one could tell. But I think gymnastics kind of took the opposite end of that. You were performing on different events as an individual. Yes, you were part of a team, but it was only your individual performance that the judges were watching, and that's what everyone kind of had their eyes on. So I think from both of those, soccer kind of gives you a little bit of both. You you are amongst a team and you're playing on a field with 10 other players, but if you individually, you can break down your own performance and look at yourself. And if you kind of perform individually well, it helps the team ultimately. So I think um, each of them taught me a bunch of different lessons in between, but I think contrasting my own individual performance being the focus for it more being in the background in an orchestra, I think is kind of a good compliment and what kind of set me up well in terms of soccer.
That's really interesting. And what I will say is, I feel like growing up, I played soccer my whole life. But in terms of the instrument side, I played the piano. And that I would, like you, well, I don't know, like you, I didn't know how you were as a violinist, but as a pianist, not a great experience because piano is a very individualistic instrument. And so if you mess up, people will know. And it's like, oh gosh, I can't imagine that, handle that stress. So I'm glad that we have that commonality. In addition to soccer, I've also played cricket, which is a popular sport in South Asia because I have South Asian
Yeah.
parents. So I think that sport has taught me a little bit about teamwork. But yeah, piano just not a good experience. um, you are now, I mean, obviously, at the time of this recording, or at the time of this recording, you're just a few days away from opening your season with the San Diego Surf. But one thing I want to ask is the fear or the anxiety of the future, in the sense that particularly professional athletes, this is a great example. I think there are a lot of people that would love to become a professional athlete. Oh, San Diego Wave, sorry, not San Diego Surf. I just
It's
realized
okay.
that. um, but nevertheless, I want to talk to you about ask you about like how you embrace the future, because when it comes to professional sports, I think a lot of athletes want to pursue that, but only a handful can only do it because unfortunately there's not much room. So I want to ask you, throughout your career, I've asked this to one athlete, but I want to ask this to everyone because I feel like it's such a realistic question. During your journey, did you ever worry about whether or not you were going to become a professional soccer player? Or did you only focus on what's like in front of you, like more so in the present, focusing on what you did in the past, what can you do right now, and then what are some things you can do in the future? Like like tomorrow and not like 5 years from now. Were you more in the present or more so like, oh my gosh, am I gonna actually do this?
I would say a little bit of both. With kind of how I operate as just a person in general, is I'm pretty goal oriented. So whether those goals were daily goals, weekly goals, or something like starting college and wanting to be a professional soccer player 5 years down the line, I always kind of had those goals. So I think in part with some of them, it kept me pretty grounded in the present, kind of taking one day at a time, one practice at a time, one game at a time. But I think from when I started at my time at Stanford as a freshman, I think I ultimately kind of wanted the sort of end goal of all of that to turn out to be a professional soccer player. So I think I at times did better than others, but had a pretty good balance of focusing on the present, but also kind of having that goal in mind and allowing those individual days to all work up and lead towards a professional career, hopefully, is kind of how I tried to navigate it.
I know obviously, I think for many of us, we're always going to continue to be learning. It's not like we stop at a specific place, but I want to ask you, and I know you're an athlete, but I feel like this question can apply to so many people when they want to pursue their own dreams and goals. What advice would you give to people when it comes to embracing the unknown? Knowing that you don't have any control over the future, you don't know what the future lies. All you can do is plan, but I feel like sometimes that fear can exist. So, based on your experience, what advice would you give to other people when it comes to embracing the unknown?
Yeah, I think you kind of touched on it a little bit. One thing I feel like I've heard um, more in a soccer sense, but I think applies to kind of all areas of life is control what you can control. There's so many factors on a soccer field, for example, that you might not be able to control, whether that's playing time or what position you're playing, all sorts of things that can apply in a soccer sense. But I think in life too, there are certain events that come up, there are challenges and obstacles that you ultimately have no con no real control over, but when those situations arise, you can control kind of how you respond to them, your attitude towards them, how you um, coexist and operate in your relationships with others. I think there are so many things that you can control, whether you choose to like kind of look inward and see that or not is kind of up to the person. But um, ultimately, there's so many things in life in general that you don't expect and maybe don't necessarily go your way, but kind of how you respond and your attitude is something that I've always tried to think about with um, soccer and just in life in general.
I want to now switch gears to Stanford because it's one of the best schools in the nation. Sorry, Ohio State, even though I go there. Um, it's one of the best schools, not just for sports, but also in academics. And I feel like a lot of people, or I feel like a lot of people want to play or attend an organization, soccer team, whatever that is. They want to be a part of the best organizations or soccer teams. But what makes a team great is not just like the performances or the players, but also the community or the culture or the environment. Because whether it's in, let's say, like in soccer, for example, we have seen men's soccer teams and women's soccer teams. They may have the best players, but they don't work together as a team. And so I want to talk about Stanford's soccer team in the sense that think of like all those like medical advertisements where you have like the before and after. Like it's like before I took this product, I was like this, and after I took this product, I look like this. Tell me a bit about the before and after of attending Stanford in the sense of like what was Kennedy like before attending Stanford, and then now that you've moved on and being almost being a professional, what have you attained from Stanford? So like what's the before and after of attending Stanford University?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think so. My kind of high school, elementary, middle school, all of that was in a very small, close-knit community. I knew kids from when I was in kindergarten growing up until we graduated high school. And I think that really small community made me feel super comfortable. It was very familiar. I was always with people I knew, um, teachers I knew, family I knew. So going into a new environment like Stanford, while I did have some familiar faces that I've crossed paths with in the soccer world, it was ultimately a really new place with a lot of really intelligent people. And I think at first that was a little bit overwhelming, knowing that I was sitting in a classroom with people that started this company and that were doing this internship. I think I definitely felt a little bit like a fish out of water. But as my time from my freshman to my senior, fifth year, whatever you want to call it, my grad year, I began to realize that kind of comparing myself to what was around me was not the way to kind of go about my time at Stanford. I think it's easy to get caught up in the idea that you're not doing enough or you're um, kind of not doing the right things that everyone else is. But ultimately, as I got older and started to focus on myself and my own track and not comparing it to those around me, I think it became a much more enjoyable experience. Taking the classes that I wanted to take, not the classes that would set me up for the next job that I wanted to do after soccer or something like that. And kind of just, yeah, being more present. There's so many things that I think I learned throughout my time, but I think being able to realize that my kind of individual path is going to look different from everyone's around me and accepting that and embracing and loving kind of that process, I think was one of the biggest things and something I'm even taking now into environment in San Diego. Obviously, people on the team, some have been here for a while, some have been in the league for way, way longer than I have. And their experiences are going to look a little bit different than mine. And I can definitely learn so much from all of the players and the resources that I have. But ultimately, I can do my best to make kind of my own experience my own and enjoy every step within that.
Yeah, and before we talk about the fact that you have 104 appearances for Stanford, you talked about the topic of comparison, and I think it's really important to remember that it's like you said, you're following your own personal journey, and like everyone else is following theirs. And I feel like also how you mentioned how they may have a company or an internship. Sure, they might have like what you're seeing on the outside, you see like what they're doing, but then there's also like their personal battles that they're going through the same way you have your own personal battles. And I know that's one of the questions I want to talk about later on, like some of the tests or things that you're grateful for, because sure, you may have played for one of the best collegiate programs and you're also playing for one of the best teams in the NWSL, but it's like, wait a minute, there were certain things that I went through. Sure, I may be at a unique position, but I went through some things that people probably don't know. And it's because of these things that have shaped me into who I am today. But before we talk about that, I know that you had 104 appearances for Stanford. I think the record before that was 102. I would love to know, I think playing for a program like Stanford is special, but were there times between appearance one and let's say one and 101? So obviously the record was 102, but between one and 101, did you ever feel like at any point that whether it's like your first, second, 50th, 60th, whatever that is, did you ever think at some point that that was going to be your last appearance? In other words, did you ever think that you were going to break that record, or was there a moment of time where you're like, yeah, I guess let me like for complexity's sake, did you ever feel like you were going to break that record, or was it just a like or yeah, did you ever know you were going to break that record?
Yeah, honestly, this it's kind of funny. I didn't even know that like what the record was. It had really never crossed my mind from when I started till when I ended. Obviously, I was fortunate enough to play an extra season due to COVID and things like that. So, I think maybe one of my grandparents might have been. I feel like you're kind of up there in terms of Stanford games played. Like, do you know how many? Just out of curiosity, I was like, no, I have no idea. I'm just gonna play until my time runs out, and that's kind of all I was focused on. Um, and I guess one of our kind of operations media person told me that I was getting close and I was maybe gonna break the record. I was like, my first kind of response was that, oh boy, I need to get out of here. I don't know how I've played so many games in college, and almost people on the wave might hate me for this, but I felt really old, and definitely was like, this has been a great experience, but wow, that's it's been a long time. Those were kind of my first responses, but at the end of the day, I was super grateful for the staff there at Stanford that they trusted me from the beginning to playing the games when I was a freshman and still trusted me when sometimes my body was breaking down when I was a fifth year grad student. So I definitely didn't anticipate that by any means, but am super, super grateful that I was able to have that experience at Stanford because it was truly amazing and I wouldn't change it.
Do you, as you were talking about this, I was kind of laughing because obviously I know you are officially holding the record, but is there a part of you that wants to keep that record, or do you hope someone overtakes it at some point?
Honestly, I hope I hope the world operates in a way that no one gets an extra COVID season, because I think without that, there's no way I would have come close to that. So, but if God forbid people do have an extra year of playing and they can physically play that many games, if not more, all power to them, and I would be super happy for whoever that is. But I hope kind of our world stays in a little bit of a better state so that that five five competitive seasons is not an option for some people because it was definitely quite a lot.
Yeah, I think that was an important part because I know you played. Um, I know you were one of many athletes that had that COVID year, so it did affect a lot of people. So it wasn't just a smooth, or not a smooth transition, but an easy journey or easy cycle compared to other athletes. Um, Now, one of the things that I obviously I struggle with confidence. So when I was asking you the last question, I kept stuttering. But one of the things I do want to talk about, especially when talking about appearances 1 through 101, is that there's sometimes moments at the time where you absolutely hated or you thought were some of your worst days, but you can look back today and go, I'm glad I went through these experiences. And I want to talk about gratefulness because when I used to think gratefulness was more of like a passive thing, like I'm grateful for my friends, I'm grateful for my family. But then after talking with a couple of guests, I realized that gratefulness isn't just about the good things, but in a weird way, the bad things that, yeah, you hated at the time, but it made you become stronger. Now, obviously, I'm not going to make you go into like your darkest days unless you're comfortable. But what I am curious to know is what were some days that you thought at the time you either hated or thought was one of your worst days of your life, but you can look back today and say, if I didn't go through these experiences, I wouldn't be where I am right now.
Yeah, I think at being at such an institution where academics are kind of at their all-time high and athletics are at their all-time high, there are probably a number of days where between the school and the soccer, I was just like, oh my goodness, this is quite a lot. But I think trying to think more specifically, I think my freshman year on the team, we had just fortunately come off of a national championship win in December and then reported back to school for the next off season in January. And I didn't really know what a time without games looked like in a college sense. So I had no expectations. But soon as I knew it, the first week we were back in January, we were up at 5 o'clock in the morning in the weight room, doing weights, doing practice in the afternoon, loaded up on classes because we weren't traveling a lot. And I think some of my hardest days were they were Fridays, which normally who doesn't love a Friday? But we were in the gym at 5:30 doing these really hard like workout circuits with cardio and weights and things like that. And they were just hard. I think I remember the first one and I somehow my body didn't stop. I don't know how it did. Mentally, I was way far gone. So I think having those days really early on in my college experience helped me because one, I knew if I could get through some of those workouts, there wasn't any sort of physical exertion that I don't think I could get through. And I still kind of feel like that today. Um, and I also, from kind of a mental standpoint with those mornings, found that kind of a similar idea, even if my mind sometimes wanders or feels like it kind of shuts down. I think if I have people around me that are doing a similar thing or people that are around me there to support me, I think that I can kind of get through anything. So I think that not only doing these hard things, but having the group of people around me to help and encourage and care for me in whatever way that is. And that kind of applies to all areas of life. I think kind of anything is possible. So the people that I'm surrounded with now, I'm super excited to get to know more and already feel like they kind of have my back through everything. So I think that was kind of one of the biggest lessons.
It's really interesting to see or forget, or it's weird how I can easily forget, and I'm sure there are other people that feel this way, where, yeah, you're a college athlete, but you're not just an athlete, you're also a student. And so the fact is that you're waking up early in the morning to work out and to train, but then the fact is that like that's just one part of your life. There's also the studying part. So I never will understand how difficult it is to be a student athlete because there's so many things that I'm not saying that like you guys have it the hardest because obviously everyone else has different challenges, but it's just like there are certain things that, especially like let's say you come back from a national championship and then you're back to like working out, and then on top of that, because it's January, you also have school too. So it's just so much. Um, a few questions before I let you go. Obviously, we talked about gratefulness, but I also want to now talk about, I guess, tests or obstacles you're facing now. I guess the right word is test. So like whether it's test with faith, test with confidence, test with whatever that is. For example, one test I hope to overcome in the future is confidence, because sometimes I go into a thing feeling not confident, even if it whether it's podcasting, exams, whatever that is. I'm like, I got this, but then I feel like I don't got this. So I'm working on the confidence part. But
Mhm.
for you, what are some tests or obstacles you're trying to pass? And how do you hope that being a professional soccer player will help you overcome that challenge, whatever that challenge looks like for you?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things, especially kind of early on in this career path, I guess, is that I want to try and be a little bit kind of like nicer on myself in a sense, not in a super bad way, but I think at the end of the day, I'm my own biggest critic, whether it's on the soccer field or I don't know, and it was in the classroom, but in other areas of life, I'm kind of my own biggest critic. And I think at times it can weigh me down in a way that is kind of negatively affecting my performance. So it kind of gets in this little cycle, a little kind of negative loop. So I think one of my um, hopes is that in this new environment, I'm kind of giving myself a clean slate in the sense where I'm allowing myself to make mistakes. I'm allowing myself to grow and things like that and change as a person and as a player so that um, I can kind of have a new criteria for myself in a sense and hold myself to a little bit more of an obtainable standard that ultimately one helps the team because I want this team to do really well this season, and two, one that helps me individually as a human being. I think yes, as a soccer player, for sure, it's very important. That is ultimately my job. But I think too, allowing myself the room to be the person I want to be off the field and being able to have aspects of my identity that aren't soccer related as well is one of my kind of biggest goals. So I think sort of self love in a sense and not sure the exact right words, but you kind of catch my drift,
Yeah.
hopefully.
Yeah, I totally get it. I understand that. Speaking of San Diego Wave, obviously, anytime when you're drafted, it's a special moment. But after 104 appearances, obviously you've learned so much. I know that you were also captain at one point. What are some things that you look to bring, not just from a soccer standpoint, but more so from a professional standpoint, or just as a human being? What do you look to bring to San Diego Wave? Because there's obviously the leadership aspect, but then also sometimes it feels like there's maybe that imposter syndrome where it's like, I was a leader at Stanford, but can I still be a leader with people who are a few years older than me? So, what are some things that you've learned at Stanford that you hope to apply with your new team? And is like for example, like is leadership one of them, or what are some things that can stick out?
Yeah, I think it's kind of tricky being the sort of new kid on the block at San Diego here. Um, some of my leadership qualities that I had a lot of at Stanford might not emerge right away, or they might not be as necessary, but they're not kind of at the forefront of my mind. I think I'm sort of kind of trying to find my way in a soccer sense and things like that. And I think that as time goes on, a lot of those sort of leadership qualities that I learned so much of at Stanford will slowly start to creep in a little bit in my new environment here in San Diego. But I think one of the biggest things that I did, especially try to embody as a leader when I was at Stanford, that I'd love to bring here is just overall positivity, whether it's from the sideline, the locker room, the weight room, on the training field, even off the training field. If it's something completely unrelated to soccer, I think that I'm able to bring kind of a positive vibe, at least I hope, to people. And I think you never understand totally what someone might be feeling on that day. And if I in even a small way can provide a little bit of encouragement and positivity, it can maybe go a long way. So I think that's kind of one of the biggest things in a new environment. If I can be positive towards other people, I think it'll ultimately kind of circle back to me as well and help me along my journey. So hopefully I can kind of bring that to the table.
My last question, this is something that I thought about very recently, but I want to ask you because you are obviously, um, I'm sure during your soccer journey, you had people that you looked up to, you were fans of certain athletes, but now you're going to be in a unique position where you're going to go from a person who used to be a fan of certain soccer players to now being in a place where people will be a fan of you. And I'm sure that at some point people are going to be like, Kennedy, you're my favorite player, or whatever that may be. Are you, is that one of the few things you're looking forward to as an athlete, like the fact that you're gonna have fans at some point? Or tell me a bit about that kind of a process or transition.
I think it'll be a little different for me. I personally love to kind of just go about my business, do my thing, and kind of get back to my little small cave I make for myself. At least that's kind of how I was at school. Um, However, I think this opportunity and position is not something a lot of people get to experience, and I'm so, so thankful for it and ultimately excited to kind of be a role model, hopefully, for someone else, like the ones that I had when I was growing up, and be a positive influence for girls that are watching the game and want to be on this stage. I think that's something that I can control a lot of and hope that I can do throughout my time here. And it's actually funny. I think you could have asked me this for a number of years who my favorite soccer player was, and she might think this is so weird, but it's Naomi Girma. And now I get to be back and play with her. And that ultimately is kind of like a dream come true because I admire her, one, as a human being so, so much. And she's an absolute beast on the soccer field. So being able to kind of share these experiences with a person that I kind of looked up to as kind of a mentor throughout my time at Stanford is super exciting. And it feels very full circle to me.
Well, if there's one thing I want to say about the San Diego Wave is that you guys probably have one of the best jerseys I've ever seen, like the very colorful one. As a Columbus Crew fan, that we released our jerseys and we look like Charlie Brown. So but it's okay. I still love the crew, but nevertheless, I know that you guys are very busy and you're getting ready for your first game of the season. And so I just want to say, Kennedy, thank you so much for joining the podcast. Best of luck this season, and I wish San Diego Wave, thank goodness I said the name right, San Diego Wave, a great season. And I hope we get to meet in person someday. It'd be really cool to meet with you and just wear that incredible jersey. I really wish Columbus Crew could have something similar, but yeah, nevertheless, thank you so much for joining the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I think everything that you're about and your goal with this podcast is awesome, and I wish you all the best. And I'm super thankful.
Thank you guys so much for listening to this episode. If you guys like what you saw, be sure to subscribe to this podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can also follow us on Instagram at the OMCG Podcast for more information on guests, preview clips, and more. Please continue to support this podcast in the future, and I can't wait to see you guys in the next episode.